Oh, hello everybody. It's Tamrin, and I am interviewing the wonderful Kerry Frizelle today on a topic I never thought I would ever be doing an interview on, which is coping during a coup. And for those who don't realize, we have been living through something unbelievable in South Africa. If you're listening from abroad, or if you are one of my South African friends, particularly based in KZN or Gauteng, last night our president went live and addressed us and basically announced that we have managed to thwart an insurrection. And for those of you who don't know, because I didn't, I had to Google the literal definition. An insurrection is what happens when you attempt to overthrow the government, and a coup is when you are successful. So effectively, we've had an attempted coup here in South Africa, and it has been harrowing and stressful. Kerry and I are both based in KwaZulu-Natal. Kerry and I met last year. I don't even know if it was last year. I've lost track of time, but during the George Floyd uprising and the rising of the Black Lives Matter movement, I did a series for white South Africans of what we can do. Kerry is a counseling psychologist, and she gave us some fantastic advice on what we can do as white people in South Africa. And what's actually, just as a side note, emerged is something called the Conversations Collective. Myself, Kerry, and some other amazing people have been doing some fantastic anti-racism work in schools around South Africa. And that is why we are here today, to give you some coping skills, if there is even such a thing, living through a time like this. So welcome, Kerry. We meet again.
We do.
Under these unimaginable circumstances.
Again. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. I know with your professional background and the work that you do, you've got a tremendous amount of experience and insight, firstly, into how something like this can happen, and maybe we can chat about that a bit. But more importantly, and very urgently, there are thousands and thousands and millions of people who are traumatized, who are still terrified. You know, we're not through the woods yet. The violence has calmed down. We're now worried about food security. And I know you've got some techniques that you want to share with us. So what have you got for us?
Okay, so the approach that I'm going to put forward is just a little acronym, if I've got it right, because I know all these English terms or concepts are quite confusing. But it's a word, RAIN, and if we break it up, it's just a nice little thing to keep in your mind. So it's a very useful tool if, for example, you find yourself in a moment becoming overwhelmed and you're feeling the heart starting to beat, the hands getting sweaty, the start of a panic attack, or just feeling completely overwhelmed. You know, you're about to have a little meltdown. You can use this strategy, but you can also use it as a reflective strategy to think back on experiences, or at the end of the day, just to check in on yourself. You could also use it around the table with your family, you know, and just work through the acronym together and talk about it. So I'll just take you through it, and maybe I'll ask you a few questions. Myself, I'll chime in with my own experiences, but I'm going to quickly close my door.
Oh, go for it. I'm going to, while you're doing that, I'm going to write on my chalkboard, because I think it's a perfect opportunity to capture the RAIN.
And to use your chalkboard, right? Okay, so RAIN. So the R stands, and just to let you know the background of this, is that it comes from mindfulness technique. But I've developed it slightly differently, and I think everybody can use it in their own way, you know. So the R stands for recognize. So this is around recognizing how we're feeling in a particular moment. And often we are very quickly consumed by emotion. You know, we quickly go down the rabbit hole and get sucked into the vortex. So we often don't actually know what we're feeling and when we're feeling them. And a lot of us don't actually have emotional literacy. we have not actually been taught to recognize and tease apart emotion. So I ask people to think about it in 3 ways. What's happening in my head? Okay, so what am I thinking? What are some of the thoughts that are starting to emerge? Am I suddenly consumed almost obsessively about whether I'm going to get food, or whether my chronic medication is going to run out, or is there going to be another wave of violence? You know, yeah. What were you going to say?
I'm going to say absolutely. And obsessively scrolling your neighborhood WhatsApp groups or Telegram groups or social media. I mean, if you're on social media now, you're watching this, so that was one good move. But what are you actually, what's happening in your head? Just come to awareness of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and what you're doing, I think you're right. Like, what kind of behavior am I engaging in? And just become conscious of that, you know. The other one is then the body. And believe it or not, we've underestimated the body in psychology, and there's a big movement to start recognizing it. How are you feeling in your body? I know now that there's absolutely a link between emotion and the body. So back pain, that horrible uneasy feeling in the gut, tight chest, shallow breathing, you know, what is my body doing? What is my body telling me? There's a lovely book about trauma called The Body Keeps the Score. And where is our trauma or our anxiety, or even just feeling completely overwhelmed and overburdened, sitting in the body, and tuning into that? And then the heart refers to the feelings. So it's the head, the body, and the heart. And naming feelings. Yeah, like I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm scared, I'm numb, I'm frustrated. You know, there are going to be a whole range of emotions. And I think people underestimate, you know, we often think grief is only an experience related to the death of a person.
Sure.
But grief is also related to the disruption in the normality of our life. Just the loss of security of food, the loss of routine, all of those things, you know, or where you're looking forward to going, I don't know, somewhere on a trip, or how, you know, the multiple ways in which this might have disrupted your life. But just recognizing it, naming it, acknowledging it. It's just about slowing down and tuning in. Okay, so the A is acknowledging it. So, okay, I acknowledge this stuff is happening. And then not to do what we instinctively do. So we all have neural pathways in our brains that are like dug out from habitual ways of thinking and responding. And very quickly, in a split second, a thought, a feeling, a bodily sensation can trigger a neural pathway. And within a split second, we can be down that normal path, which is one of utter distraction, despair.
Yes.
And okay, so what happens if this judgment for a while? Tune in and just suspicion this is just what it is. And I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to sit here with it for a bit.
Yes, I mean, I'm really relating to what you're saying. And earlier this week, I interviewed Gilan Gork, who is effectively a mindfulness specialist, and he gave us a little technique to help us in this initial phase. And he talked about how just getting back to basics of breathing can help us just recognize and get aware. If you are, because as you were talking, and I was thinking about all the panic that I've had this week, I've been like, how do I stop that monkey mind? Like I'm in proper panic mode, and sometimes just he talked about taking 2 sharp breaths in just allows you to recognize and just come to awareness of what you're experiencing, right?
And so possibly when that focusing on the breath, what does it feel like just to take in a breath and to feel it leave the body? We don't often tune in with that. And that's our life force. That, you know, I often say to people as well, maybe find somewhere to sit, ground your feet on the floor, think about how it feels to be grounded. The chair supporting, drop your shoulders, and just sit with it for a moment. Don't minimize it, because we know that what you're going through is rough, but also don't become catastrophic in your thinking. So if you can just pause that moment, just hold it, just come into this moment right now and acknowledge what's happening. Don't fight it, but don't entertain it. Don't invest. And remember, we all have narratives. We all have habitual ways of responding in certain situations. So in particular, people who've been traumatized have what we refer to as a negativity bias. That does not mean they are negative people. It means that their brains are so tuned in for threat that they perceive all situations and all cues as potentially catastrophic. Because they have actually had things go wrong. They know that possibility. So it's trying to bring the brain in and just say, okay, for a moment, I'm gonna consciously leave that aside, and I'm just gonna come into this moment and just tune in, recognize what I'm feeling, acknowledge it. The other one is then the I stands for interrogate. So once you've calmed yourself down, you've taken a few breaths, you've grounded yourself, you've relaxed, you're now going to interrogate. You're going to ask yourself, what's going on? Okay, why am I anxious? Why am I afraid? And some of the answers will be quite obvious, but I think people need to normalize how they're responding. Any person in a situation of threat is wired to respond in either a flight, fight, or freeze mode.
Yes, absolutely. And I've got a funny story to tell you about that. We already knew this, myself and my husband, but we really saw it playing out in terms of our coupledom this week. Who's got the flight and who's got the fight response? For those of you who haven't been around, Sunday night, Monday night in Durban or KZN in general was a terrifying experience. I was waking up in the night, hearing my husband's voice relaying messages of SOS and panic around my neighborhood. And by the morning, I had decided I was getting airplane tickets and I was getting out of here. And if I needed to charter a plane, I literally made inquiries. I was going to hire a private plane. I was packing anyone who wanted to come. My husband and I had a meeting in the plane. I can't even remember. Maybe Tuesday morning, might have been Wednesday morning. He looked at me with a straight face. He said, I'm not leaving. They need me. I've got to stay. I've got to do what's necessary. And he set up a headquarters in the local hotel, and he had the police involved and these people involved and that people involved. And he had a proper fight response and I had a proper flight response. And we were operating at base level. We agreed that we were going to part the ways. I was going to take kids and go, and he was going to stay and put up a fight.
Right. So these are all things that, in a sense, we are actually almost genetically wired to do. And so we have to, and this is why we have to do this calming, slowing down, and then ask these questions. What's going on? Yes, this is scary, but then normalizing in a sense that this is what happens when we are traumatized. So what is happening? What am I wired to do? So for example, you are more likely to be the person who runs. Okay?
I'm out of there. I'm gone. I know I'll be out the window faster than anything. If I hear, I'll die running one day. That's for sure. I know. and laughing because I've got a response, a laugh response to adrenaline. So I know I'm going to die running and laughing.
So I'm known. My friend actually wanted to confiscate my car keys from me because she was certain that if I had to, I was going to go to the front line. You know, that
no, I was looking for boats. I was out. I was going helicopters, boats. I was going to go out. I was going to be in Mars by morning. Like I was gone.
Then there are people who freeze, who just like look like the deer in the headlamp. You know, like
Yes.
which way do I go? Like I don't know what to do. You know. You know, and just to kind of, all right, like recognize which one I'm doing, recognize that's a response that we are genetically engineered to do, but we're not living with lions in the bush, you know. We live in a society and we have to think about it slightly differently. So, so my thing is to also ask, why is this a particular trigger for me? Why, in what way is my response familiar to me? You know, have I had trauma before? Have I been in a situation of a similar nature? How are these feelings familiar? What may be being tapped into, which is exacerbating how we feel? So I've been in a couple of traumatic situations in my life, and I could feel on the second day, I could actually feel my system almost shutting down. And I was getting what is a familiar, like depressed feeling, but quite severely depressed. And I panicked. But actually I did this technique and I started to ask myself some of these questions. Where's this stuff coming from? These are remnants of earlier experiences. And even just processing that, I found is incredibly useful. Why am I afraid? Okay, for you, you've got children. You know, your maternal instinct is also gets activated. So we've got all these things happening inside of ourselves. But I think what's an important strategy here is to start rationalizing. Is this rational? Am I catastrophizing? So what we call this is it's a cognitive approach. It's simply challenging thoughts. Yes. You know, ask yourself, you know, is this is this the worst case scenario? And I must say, I started to understand or acknowledge that what was happening for me was that I was watching the media. And what we have to understand about how the media reports, I mean, you will know this, is there's an approach called framing, the framing theory, which is where the news focuses on a particular aspect, and a lot of that is the drama.
Absolutely.
That my data's going to switch off on my phone, so we might have to switch over. Will that be possible if I need to?
Yeah, we can pause for sure.
Should we pause now while I quickly do that?
Okay, you go ahead. I'm going to carry on talking. What I want to say is, let's be clear. Right now, we can interrogate and say, is the danger imminent? But 2 or 3 days ago, it was imminent. I mean, they were literal gunshots and what I call a husband army, you know, civilians arming themselves out on the streets, trying to defend and protect. And in that case, if I had to ask myself, is this legitimate? Like, okay, I'm aware I'm panicking, but is this a genuine panic? The answer would have been yes. Yes, it is. It's legitimate. But only 3 or 4 days later, the violence has subsided. Yes, there are still pockets of violence. And yes, there's some uncertainty about the supply chain and food coming in. But the reality is the government is now aware that there was an insurrection, an attempted coup. They are a whole bunch of husband armies out there, I mean, and wife armies and civilian armies who are a week into understanding what it means to barricade their roads. We're not in the same situation now as we were just 3 or 4 days ago. So when you go through this process and you interrogate, if your physical responses that you're having are the appropriate response to the threat, it's different today than it was 3 days ago. And I know it's a big ask to say, listen, today's different than 3 days ago. But the reality is it's that dynamic. It's that dynamic.
And I agree with you. I mean, I think we have to know that when there is a real threat,
Yes.
you know, activated and people did what was needed, you know, was needed in that moment. But I also started to realize that I was getting only this catastrophic frame, and every so often these news stories were coming up to say, hang on, you know, there's a lot of places where it hasn't hit. People are mobilizing. People are getting out.
Yes. That's part of the picture that you need to widen the frame. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And Jess Basson always shares this story where she said there was a story she refers to where this young guy was saying his mother always taught him that in times of crisis, look for the helpers.
Yes.
There you will find hope. There you will find some relief. And
boy, and that has happened in a way that I could never have anticipated. The amount of people who have stood up, the amount of coming together. I mean, those first 2 nights, the neighborhood groups were alight with who's got nappies, who's got formula, who can go to the bridge, who can do this, who can do that. And people just came together, and there were exponentially more helpers than there were insurgents or rioters. Exactly, yeah.
And for example, we're also just seeing the most, like, for example, I've decided that taxis can have right of way for the rest of my living life, as you know, and
yes.
you know, like just people coming and standing up and bringing calm. And I saw the most beautiful movie of a little video of farmers driving with taxis all around them, so that the cars in to the urban areas to drop off milk and bread and veg and fruit.
Yes,
and
I can actually feel that emotion welling up in me as I think of that scene. And if you're watching and you don't know what we mean by taxis, if you're not South African, we have these minibus, minivan, public transport vehicles which we call taxis. And they are considered a menace on the road because they cut in and they're a bit lawless in that way, and they do what they have to get their passengers in the middle of the highway, and people hate on them quite a lot. But they are in associations, and they have communication structures set up, and they've got hierarchy set up, and they're a business, and they've got a lot of clout in the community, and they've got a lot of pull and weight, and they're armed, and all of this stuff, which came in a lot of handy when they said no more. No more looting, no more nothing, no destroying our economy, not on our watch, and just came to the defense of farmers who needed to deliver food and people communities who were being attacked. And like you said, right of way for the rest of your life.
Right.
No such thing.
You want to come in front of me? Definitely.
And what about the last one? Have we covered that, Kerry? The end?
No, so we have kind of gone into it. I was just thinking we've kind of, and that's what's interesting about this. It kind of like moves in between, you know,
like rain, it flows.
Yeah, the rain. It mingles. So the end for me, I've given 2 ends. The first one is Nourish, and the second one is Navigate. So the first one is kind of like what we've already been doing, you and I talking, is the Nourish is basically what can we do, you know, to rationalize, challenge our thoughts, calm the vagus nerve, you know, that part of the brain that is feeling panicked, just ground ourselves, some breathing exercises. A friend of mine has been doing yoga on the grassy patch on the side of the road in our community.
Yes.
Things
So
like
just
that.
connecting, just looking up. In my case, my sense of nourishment is just reaching out to the few key people who are in my immediate circle, just checking in. How are you? What's going on? I'm freaking out. Are you freaking out? Do you need potatoes? You know, just the most basic level of connection.
Right. And did you see that little video I sent you where they talk about everything being too much-a-berry? And being overwhelmed. And they say to the kids, two things: breathe, just calm down and breathe, and reach out to as many people as you can. Just increase the sense of connection. And this isn't about having firm family, friends, or a partner, or anything like that. It's literally just reminding yourself that you are part of a larger community, even if it's the person standing in the queue next to you.
Yes.
Said to me on Facebook, she spent 2 days outside Oxford. The first day she didn't get in. The second day she waited all day, but she said it was the two best and well-spent days of this year. She felt more connected. And she said she got insight into different people's experiences, and it was Black, colored, Indian, everybody mixed in that queue. There wasn't racial profiling happening, and it started to restore a sense of safety. And it's also like with the rationalizing. I said last night on Facebook, I said, we need to remember there are 60 million people in South Africa.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of those people did not loot. The way we would normally say it is only a fraction looted. And I think it's important to frame it the other way, that the vast majority didn't. And that it is important for us to keep that in mind. And also it said to me, it also was mostly hard hit in KZN, but other provinces are not experiencing anything like this. And touch wood that it will stay that way. But just that kind of seeking out information that is trustworthy. And I always say to people, choose one or two social media or news, like platforms that you trust, like Daily Maverick. Is it the Maverick? And go on and read their articles. They're posting stuff every day, and they're critical. They give you a nuanced understanding, because another thing that happens when we are under terror, it comes from a theory called terror management theory, is that we can hold on even more firmly to a bias or a stereotype or a worldview. And actually, we've got to be so careful of it, because it actually just feeds into a vicious cycle, and it feeds into that catastrophic feeling, and it can leave us feeling much more disconnected and alone and isolated. So that educating yourself on what's actually happening, understanding it, challenging your biases, calming exercises, connection. In the navigate, you see what we do, if we can do the recognize, acknowledge, interrogate, and nourish, we create a gap between emotional reaction and behavior. Okay, and those things are often like that. So you've got to see it like that. But I'll use you, Tam, for a moment. So if you could see emotion and behavior like that, they often sit like that. This technique tries to create that. Just a little gap, so that this is more considered. So this is different. So instead of going down the negative narrative or a particular storyline or catastrophic set of ideas, you can navigate something different going forward.
Yes, so important. That point you've just raised. In fact, I've got a book brewing in my mind that may be given birth to one day, with a working title, The Space in Between, talking about that exact space, because for me, that space between what's happening and how you react determines your destiny, not just in a in a crisis, but on an everyday basis. It's how the outcome of your day, therefore the outcome of your week, therefore the outcome of the years, and what you do with your life. And it's so easy to not notice that. It's actually the micro reactions. And the reason that's so important to me is because it's not I don't have that skill naturally. I am a very, very easy to ignite person.
Very few of us have it, Sam.
And a daily practice, and I succeed half of the time. I think my success rate is 49% or something, but I have to make an enormous effort to hold that space in between and to be deliberate about the response. And it's incredibly challenging because we're talking about neurology. We're talking about our wiring and and the blueprint we were given based on the experiences we've had up till now, right?
Right. And the most amazing thing is that's coming through neuropsychology at the moment is the plasticity of the brain, that it is to rewire it. It is possible to rework the neural pathways, that we can do this stuff, but it takes practice. It's like learning to play the piano, or in my case, learning to ride my bike in a way that, I can stay on a bit.
That you don't have stitches on your knees, which I have seen. No, look, that's part of the course, literally.
Yeah, but it a lot of people look at what we do and think and say to me, my gosh, like, do you just close your eyes and go for it? And I'm like, no, please. I think it is that. It takes skill, and it's building it up and practicing it till such time you can move into something new. So it is that. But one of the things that I've put forward is the importance of hope in a time like this. And that's where for the navigate is I'd like people to think about this in a few ways that I think will be helpful for them. Is to think about hope is often associated with religious concepts like faith or prayer. And I want to say that you get two types of hope. You get a naive hope and you get a critical hope. So the naive hope is the one that just goes, I really hope this sorts itself out. This too shall
I'm under the bed.
Yeah, this too shall pass. I'll say a prayer, and that is not wrong. I'm not saying that it isn't. But what I'm saying is that there's a different kind of hope that I think is really needed in a time like this. And that's called
the say a prayer belongs in these first two phases. Right. But then you have to get to the navigate, and you have to have the right.
And then we have to do
form
something
of hope.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've come up with 3 R's that I believe make up critical hope. And the first is what I refer to as resist. So we've done a lot of resistance, for example, in our community, in our country, to resist this movement or this attempt. Okay, we've come together in these quite collective ways to protect our communities. We are now coming to clean up, to source food together, I've seen an incredible amount of connection. And all of that is a form of resistance against a system that said, we're going to use you as pawns, and we're going to do this viciously, and we're going to destroy jobs and livelihoods and a sense of security and safety. And it's possible to resist. But what we also need to resist at this time is the need to blame. And we need to be very careful. We can be angry, we can be tired, we can be exhausted, we can be frustrated, scared, and we still don't have to be, for example, racist. Okay, so we know that the vast majority of people who are implicated in the looting happen to be Black people because of their socioeconomic status. And I could also explain to you why I think that there were other people in fancy cars in those situations. But what I'm saying is we need to be very careful. There are 60 million people in South Africa. I don't even think 2 or 3% of them are white, vast majority are Black African people, and the vast majority of people did not loot.
Oh.
So we've got to be so careful of those kind of thought patterns.
Yeah.
And you know, and that, yeah. So the other thing is we also just, we need to resist the framing by the news. We need to be aware the news is going to want to sell ideas by showing the grimmest pictures, the worst narratives. And we need to just be vigilant, like Jess says, for the helpers, for the people making a difference. And so that's the first R. The second R for me is rebuild. So what can we do to start contributing to rebuilding our communities and our country as a whole? So here you can think of things like, can I get involved in a cleanup group? If you can't do that, can I just be involved in going to my local end of the street where the guys might be standing, or families or women or whoever, and offer a cup of coffee? Or can I be involved in what the work I've done is to source food. So my friend and I managed to find out that just 10 minutes away, there's a farm. We could buy cabbage, spinach right off the ground, like literally it had just been picked and packed for us. And we managed to access eggs because this guy said, listen, I've got 200,000 eggs that were supposed to be going out for distribution and I can't get them anywhere. Wow. He got out because it went through social media and we all went there and bought his eggs and then distributed them. So one of the ways we can get food into the hardest hit areas is by getting food maybe through our housekeepers, the security guards that are still coming to work. Another thing you could do is donate to the Gift of the Givers. The Robin Hood Foundation, I've heard, is very, very good as well. And yeah, so in what way can we rebuild? We can also rebuild by holding hope, reassurance, reaching out to people and saying, how are you? How are you doing? Just checking in with people emotionally. And then the last one I call restitution, where we have to start thinking forward. We have to start thinking about for like, what kind of country do we want to live in? Because part of the analysis, and I'm not saying it's only the explanation, but part of what has been happening has been a result of inequality in our country. And it's not just economic inequality. It's also social inequality. It's also where lives are considered more valuable if you meet a certain set of criteria, you know. And we have to start asking ourselves, how did all of this stuff come together? Because for me, there's a combination of things that have resulted in what we've seen. So if you think about, some people have said to me, but Kerry, why a BMW being on Queen Nandi collecting 3 TVs?
Yes.
You know, where the macro was. And I said, it was actually Eusebius Makaza and Kapana Ratela who came up with the distinction between rational violence and gratuitous violence. And the rational is that you see a shop open, people are taking stuff, you run in there, you grab a packet of maize meal or some groceries and you run and you get out of there. Gratuitous violence is when you don't need that stuff, you loot it, you take it, and possibly when you're leaving, you destroy the building and you set it alight. It's the latter form of violence that very many people don't understand. And for me, that's the violence that is the outcome of a collection of things. Years and years of social inequality, intergenerational trauma, plus political incitement, plus an element of criminality. So there's a lot of complex issues that have come together. There's not one explanation for this, one entire explanation, because I think people underestimated how out of control this would get and how it would spiral, the degree to which it got out of control.
Sure, I did.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I think even the people behind
who were participating, instigating it and participating. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Like, oh my God, what has happened? You know, like, oh, you know.
Yeah.
So the question then is, how can we as individuals commit ourselves in the long term to creating a country that is more just? You know, can we push for policy change where we have the power to do that? Can we rethink our economic and consumerist behavior? Because a lot of this has been driven by a discourse that says you are only worthy if you own lots of.
Yes. Sure. And I think a lot of people have just lived through the reality of what it's like to not be sure where your next meal is going to come from. And that's been a very jolting experience. I mean, I remember whatever it was, day 2, I literally started baking bread with the flour in my cupboard that is usually just for my son's Play-Doh. I'm one of these gluten-free, don't even eat bread people. I wasn't panicking about the bread and the milk. I was worried about if I'm going to have honey and oats. So I'm using my the flour to bake bread, literally on the Tuesday and the Wednesday, and seeing it get to the end, and then using the pasta that had been in the cupboards since Pa fell off the bus and dishing it up and thinking, this is it. When this is finished, what next? And that sense of dread, that real fear, which, by the way, is the feeling that most mothers and South Africans are very familiar with when it's not an apocalypse. So that realization, can I get in the shops? Can I mean, I had just a story to share. On yesterday, I drove 30 kilometers north to pick up a staff member because all of their shops were looted, and our shops in Ballito, which hadn't been looted and been locked down, were opening up slowly to bring him to shop. And we were allowed 20 items each. And we parted our ways. We both got kids exactly the same age. So we did the nappies and the formula. And then he stopped at 14 items, even though there were 20 left. And I'm like, we're not sure if we're going to be able to shop again. It's like, no, this is enough. And I just realized, you know what? I'm shopping for my 20 items, thinking, what am I going to take in case we can't get it? And that was probably a very typical shopping experience for him, being really selective about what he's going to take and his normal shop. And I had a real
So can I take? And you're thinking, some can I take? That's how people have to think.
You've got to wake up.
There's a huge amount of empathy for understanding what food insecurity might feel like. And that's another thing, is start thinking about how we can contribute to food security as part of the restitution. So, for example, today we had an AGM at the little estate I live on. I rent a little cottage here, and I sent a request thinking that I would get laughed down, but they've actually come back and said that they think it's a brilliant idea, and they've given us the go-ahead. There's a tiny little strip of land at the top, and we've motivated to put up a tunnel and start growing vegetables and produce that we are going to all buy on the estate, but also give at a good rate to staff to ensure that they get. And we're going to give the Hillcrest Aid Centre produce to help them with their food insecurity. They live from week to week, not knowing if they're going, what they're going to get to feed the AIDS patients. So what I'm saying is that there are just so many things that we can do, but we can also just change or influence the systems in which we are embedded. just to make, in all sorts of ways, the world that we live in, the country we live in, the communities we live in, just a much nicer, kinder space. You know, capitalism sets us up in opposition to each other. It's all about what I have and what you don't have. It's all about, can what I have create a sense of envy in another person? And it always leaves you feeling incomplete. And here we have an opportunity to say, we're not going to buy into the system anymore. That we've had an experience of how collectivity and community is what is so important for our mental health and our well-being. And so how can we bring about change, not just in ourselves, you know, but also in creating a context that enables health and well-being? Because at the end of the day, it's easy for us to turn around and say this was a bunch of thugs. But if we really want to understand what's going on, this is partly driven by a huge sense of like food insecurity, impoverishment, and just a belief that lives don't matter, you know? And really that we need to challenge this stuff. And
I'm just drawing a parallel to a saying that talks about health and wellness, saying if you don't make time for your health, you're going to be forced to make time for your illness.
Yeah. And
I feel like it's the same kind of experience. If we don't make time for restitution, you're going to have to make time for being barricaded in your community for a week, terrified, because that's the illness version of not getting help in the country.
Absolutely. So we, you know, so hopefully this is a technique that people can use just to understand how they might be feeling in a particular moment. But it's all about, like you said, that space in between.
Yes. Don't you just want to recap them for us as we bring ourselves to a close?
Is recognize how we might be feeling. So what's happening in our head, our thoughts, what's happening in our body, what's happening in our heart, our feelings. Acknowledging that, taking time to do some deep breathing, something to calm us, ground us, maybe pray, maybe a bit of meditation, and then to just sit and ask, what's going on? Interrogate it. What's going on? Why am I feeling like this? What is this attached to? Why am I feeling it particularly in such an intense way? Where does this stem from? N stands for Nourish. How do we calm ourselves, get a sense of safety through connection, breathing exercises, rationalizing, challenging our thoughts, educating ourselves, and then navigating a way forward so that we bring about change, not just in ourselves, but also that we contribute to a collective well-being in order to bring about or to try and contribute to rebuilding a space that feels safe for all of us, not just those of us who've got assets or lots of money or financial security, but that it becomes a safe space for everybody, or a safer space. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really hope if you're listening and you've been wigging out, spinning out like all of us have been, just to remind yourself of this simple step to just create that space. Be aware of how you can build hope with those 3 R's. Kerry, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you as always. I'm really grateful that you've shared your insights and your knowledge and your background and your experience with us. And we do tend to do these emergency trainings during emergency. So in that case, I feel like I want to say, I hope I don't have to do another live with you, but I do love doing live with you. And yeah, please, if you're watching this live, let us know in the comments below if this has been useful, what your number 1 takeaway has been. And please share it with your friends, share it with your community. Let people have this knowledge, let people have access to this. You never know who desperately needs it right now, even if they're not in the phase where they're nourishing and connecting and reaching out. If it lands on their news feed, it could be just the thing that they need. So please like and comment and share, because it helps get out to more people. And it's been such an important gift to bring this information to you.
Okay. Thanks, Tam.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Cheers.